I always wanted to dress as a woman, but I didn't dare to do it until I turned 30. And I never would have done it without the help of my next-door neighbor. Ever since I became an adult, I wanted to buy a dress and makeup for myself, but the years went by and I still hadn't made the decision. I had left my 20s behind, but I had not been able to get up the courage to buy women's clothes, even just to see how they looked on me. Luckily, destiny was going to lead me to a woman who would help me to fulfill my dreams and be happy. I knew Mrs. Joan from passing her on the street or in the supermarket, but I had never spoken to her before. She seemed to me to be an elegant woman with impeccable hair and clothes. I must admit that I was a little envious when I observed her flawless and very feminine manicure and makeup. I thought she was about 5 years older than me, but it turned out that she was already in her early 40s. She looked younger than her real age. My friendship with Joan began one day when I saw her lamenting about some damage that had occurred in her house. I went over to ask her, and she told me that the roof of her house had broken and that she was worried about possible leaks. She was afraid that her house would flood because a storm was forecast for the next day. Luckily for her, I knew a lot about carpentry and masonry since those had been my first jobs when I was younger. I was now in the advertising business, but I hadn't forgotten my old skills. They can be really useful. You never know when something in the house might break. So I went home to get my tools and a ladder and climbed onto the roof of Mrs. Jones' house. As I had guessed, the problem was not that serious, and I was able to solve it without having to go downstairs and back to my house to get more materials or tools. When I finished the job, I took a picture to show my neighbor how her roof looked. You should have seen the look of relief on her face. It was so obvious that I couldn't help but feel proud. Joan asked me how much I would charge her for the job, but I refused to accept any money. I did the repairs for fun and for the joy it gave me to help a neighbor, and especially one as distinguished as she was. My neighbor smiled at me and invited me to have a drink at her house. She served me coffee in a very sophisticated porcelain cup, so elegant that I began to wonder how much of my salary it would take to buy a complete set. I left her house satisfied with myself and promised to return the following week. Fortunately, the storm passed, but it was not as intense as predicted, and the roof of my neighbor's house did not report any damage or leaks. So I went to her house the following Friday for tea, which of course was delicious. I started going to her house once a week, sometimes for coffee and sometimes for tea. We became close friends, and I began to trust her more. Every time I went to her house, I couldn't help but admire her shoulder-length blonde hair, impeccably styled, her sober makeup, and her nails of a length that seemed appropriate for her age. I was glad to have a friend as elegant as Joan. It was one afternoon tea in her kitchen when I first told her about my wish to dress as a woman. At first she thought I was joking. She had always thought of me as a very masculine man with thick hands that had allowed me to help her with problems in her house, both on the ceiling and walls. The week before, I had plastered a wall in her living room. Precisely, that's the funny part, I told her. Carpentry and masonry are a side of me. But there's another side of me that wants to try on a dress and nail polish. I couldn't believe those words came out of my mouth. I had never been so honest in my life. But it was better that way, because I felt like I had taken a weight off my shoulders. For her part, Joan was touched by my words. In front of her was a rather tall man, with broad, hairy hands and arms, who was asking her for help in transforming himself into a beautiful woman. And so she set about helping me fulfill my dreams. Joan worked as a fashion designer and seemed to have done very well for herself, which explained why she had bought a very large house all to herself. So she took my measurements and spent the next week making a dress for me. I was very honored and thanked her in advance with a big hug, promising to help her with anything she needed around the house. Believe me when I say that the dress she had designed for me fit me perfectly. The pale pink color of the dress was simply gorgeous. I couldn't believe how good it looked on me when I looked in the mirror in Joan's living room. But of course that wasn't all. It was just the beginning of my transformation. My kind neighbor gave me a pair of pink women's shoes. The heel was not so high, and that's why I didn't have such a hard time adjusting to them. They were very nice shoes and of good quality. Next was the makeup. I had been waiting for a moment like this for a whole decade. Joan did my makeup excellently. Somehow she managed to make my mouth look softer and prettier with a pink lipstick. My nose looked thinner and my eyes bigger with the help of eyeliner and mascara. She also gave me a straight brunette wig that I liked as soon as I saw it. "Are you happy?" she asked me. I took seconds to answer because I was holding back my emotions. I didn't want to start crying and ruin all the makeup. Of course I told her I was very happy and hugged her tighter than ever. Joan painted my nails pink and finally put a headband on my wig. This last detail fascinated me completely. I looked in the mirror and felt like the cutest crossdresser in the whole world. I had waited years and years to feel this feminine, and thanks to my neighbor, that wish had come true. My sweet neighbor put some women's perfume on my neck and wrists and lent me a white women's purse that matched the headband. For the first time I was going out on the street, dressed as a woman. I was as happy as I was nervous about the idea, but of course I wasn't going to back out. We walked to a restaurant. I tried to imitate Joan and walk like her. Of course I could never be as graceful as her, but just imitating her would be enough to make me feel cute. We arrived at the restaurant and Joan ordered sushi and soda for both of us. I just said, "Thank you" to the waiter in the softest voice possible. As we waited for our meal I looked around, nervous that someone would discover that I was actually a man. I had shaved both my legs and armpits, and I knew I looked very feminine, but it wasn't enough to calm my anxiety. My friend took my hands and told me to relax. "The important thing is what you feel, not what others think," she said with a smile. And she was right. I was feeling very pretty, both inside and out. That was the important thing. Our order arrived. The food was very tasty. Of course I did my best to look as classy as my friend when I grabbed the chopsticks for the sushi. We paid the bill and returned to my friend's house. I changed into the men's clothes I was wearing before and took the pink dress in a bag. The truth was that Joan had charged me very little for the product, only what the materials were worth. I guess she was returning the favors from my labors at her house. The most important thing was not the price of things, but that we had formed a very lovely friendship. In the following months I continued to go to Joan's house once a week for a drink and to chat. I commissioned her to design 3 more dresses for me, 1 black, 1 white and 1 red, plus a white skirt. This time I paid what they were worth, because the truth is that they are very nice and quality garments. I am proud of how beautiful I feel when I wear them, and also of my friend's work. Besides going out together for fun and having tea, I sometimes do some gardening work for Joan. The flowers in her garden are very pretty, although there are too many weeds, and it takes a lot of work to clean up the garden. However, every cloud has a silver lining. Because yesterday it occurred to me to ask my friend to design me a flower print dress. I can't think of anything more feminine than that. I'm sure my friend is going to be thrilled to design something like that, and that I'm going to feel very pretty wearing that dress. The end.